I'm Esther Dillard on the Black Information Network, chatting with writers and authors who offer an added perspective for our listeners. This is The Color Between the Lines. On this edition of The Color Between the Lines, we're speaking with Elizabeth Liba about her book, I'm Not Yelling, A Black Woman's Guide to Navigating the Workplace. For more than 10 years, Ms. Liba has worked as a college professor, teaching American literature, creative and professional writing. She's also been a director of instructional design with 8 years of experience developing and deploying online courses. She's also currently the co-founder of The Great Exhale, and she has over 130,000 followers on LinkedIn. And her book is definitely a great read that explores some of the challenges women face in the workplace. Welcome, Elizabeth Liba, to the BIN.
Thank you so much, Esther. Thank you for having me.
Well, I first found you on LinkedIn and I followed you because some of the things that you were posting just really resonated with me and a lot of other Black women. And I decided I would get your book and listen to the audio version because a lot of times I'm reading 5 and 6 things at the same time. So I'm so glad I did. And it really had a lot of interesting, thought-provoking nuggets that I think a lot of our listeners might be interested in reading. So I always try to give a little bit of a background for people. I did get a little bit, but please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. You came from an immigrant family of healers, really, those who worked in medicine, and then you took your own path into education. Can you talk about how that background kind of led you to this profession today?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always seen myself as a truth teller. Coming from an immigrant family, I always look at things from the perspective of what can I learn? And I think that's why I fell into education. I have a lot of family members that are nurses and work in the medical profession. But for me, I just felt like a lot of my gifts came from being able to explain concepts. And that's why originally I went to school to be a writer. I was going to be a journalist and then just kind of fell into education after graduating because I minored in education. And I just loved it. I loved talking to students and guiding students and mentoring students. And a part of my journey was just starting to just be more intentional about my career and joining LinkedIn and networking about education and about being more intentional about my online profession and designing courses. And then the pandemic happened and George Floyd was murdered. And I just felt like, okay, I advocate for students in the classroom. I particularly want to be a voice for students that are marginalized, first generation students, students that have really maybe never even been encouraged. And that kind of blossomed into, I need to really become a voice for other folk that have not had their voices heard. So after George Floyd was murdered, I started speaking about social justice, about racial profiling, about the history of the Black experience in America. Since I teach American literature, a lot of people were saying, oh, I don't know why this is happening, or this is not America. And as an American literature teacher, I felt like this is a part of my responsibility as well. Not everybody's maybe taken a college course in literature. They don't really understand American history. So I became an advocate for American history and American literature and making sure people understand the African-American aspect of that, that we are the core really of the whole country and of the country's history and not ancillary, not something that should be banned. We are a central part of that. And as I was talking to Black women on the LinkedIn platform, a lot of Black women expressed that they were experiencing microaggressions in the workplace, feeling unheard, feeling that their voices weren't valued, not being promoted, not feeling that they saw themselves in the C-suite. And when they got to the C-suite, they felt like they weren't being respected. So I wanted to dive into that, not just the history, but how did that bleed over into the present? How were Black women, particularly as I'm a Black woman, affected by that? Because I was affected by it, but I thought, hey, it's just me. I work in higher ed. Maybe my environment is just not conducive to my being able to advance. But what I found was I was speaking to women and networking with women across the LinkedIn platform because of my advocacy work in this area. And everyone was saying the same things. Everyone was saying they were exhausted and burnt out, and they were trying to just make their way into these spaces and didn't feel heard. So that's really where the book came from. It came from my, really as an instructor, I'm always looking for solutions. And I'm always thinking, well, let's look into why this is happening. This is happening. This is a phenomenon. Somebody must have studied it. And that's what I started to do. I started to literally try to come up with why this was happening from a historical context, who had studied it, that maybe could give me some framework of how we could solve it. and then present those solutions in the book. And that's where
Mm.
I'm Not Yelling came from.
There's a lot in this book too. There were just so many different things, and I think though one of the things that really resonated, at least with me, was the fight to feel valued in the space, and in a bigger corporate setting, it's probably even much more fierce. What do you how do you address that in the book, and how women need to change that toxic work environment? What I know you can't give everything, but are there some key things that women can do to empower themselves that you suggest that could improve their chances of being valued in the workplace?
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing, a lot of times I get this question, is to really reframe it in the sense that we have had the civil rights movement. We've had Black Lives Matter. We've had all of this uprising after George Floyd was murdered across the country now. A lot of pushback with CRT, DEI being defunded. So we know that these spaces have not necessarily been conducive to us. And I think a lot of us have maybe even bought into some of those narratives. Oh, Oprah here, LeBron, you had a Black president. So we kind of say, oh, it's, post-racial America. That's just not true. And it's not realistic of us. As this fight to gain our rights continues to go on, and we always see push and pull. It happened after Reconstruction. A lot of people don't even realize how many Black congressmen there were right after Reconstruction. There always is a little bit of that push and pull. So I think for us, we have to go into these environments not necessarily expecting them to change. And I think sometimes people do get a little bit maybe demoralized when I say that, but the fact of the matter is they haven't changed enough. John Henrik Clark said, if you compare slavery, then everything seems like progress. And I think that's a radical idea, but it's really true. We're a lot of times the barometer is, well, we're allowed in these spaces, but we're not getting paid as much as we should. We know that Black Women's Pay Equity Day is September 21st. So we have to work a whole extra 9 months just to get paid what a white non-Hispanic male gets paid in the previous year. So a year and 9 months to make the same money. So we know that we're not represented in the C-suite. We know that we're not hired at the same rates. All the stats say that, but yet we have those in the majority and those in these leadership positions, and even DEI practitioners telling us, let's just work with us. It takes time. And like James Baldwin, I would say, well, how much time do you need for your progress? We have been asking for that. And I think we're demanding it now. But to answer the question, when you go into the spaces, knowing that historically these spaces have not been welcoming or conducive, rather than putting the onus on ourselves, hey girl, I got to get some more training, I got to get another master's degree, maybe I need to work harder, I'm not going to take vacation this year because Chad might get a promotion over me. Chad is going to get that promotion whether you take time off or not. And we need to just be realistic about a lot of Black women. We're burning ourselves out. We're burning the candle at both ends. We're leaving corporate America actually statistically in record numbers. 97% of Black folk across the board did not want to return to the office, which was a Slack survey that was done during the pandemic. So these are not figments of our imagination. And I think the biggest takeaway that I tell people from the book is going into every environment, knowing that you belong there, valuing yourself. Don't wait for others, whether it's those in the C-suite, your manager, whoever it is that you're looking for validation. It's not going to come from them because they've been conditioned by narratives in the media, education, and everything in their, maybe in their community, not to value Black folk and particularly Black women. And that's just really realistically, I'm not saying that as an opinion, that's what the stats say. So I'm not going by, hey, this is a nice person. Sure, they're a nice person, but statistically across the board, a lot of times they're not hiring people that look like us. They don't want us to be their manager. They feel that's where the microaggressions come from. They feel as though, hey, this is a Black woman. Is she really qualified? And all of the unconscious bias trainings and all of the DEI frameworks and all of the studies and surveys still don't get to the core of the problem, which is we don't feel safe in those environments. We don't feel psychologically safe, and we're under a great deal of duress. Studies show that majority of us have encountered microaggressions, and we say micro, but they're really death by 1,000 paper cuts. Someone saying, hey, you the cleaning, you need to go in the back. And you're like, no, actually, I'm the manager, and those things that, oh, you speak so well. Oh, you have your hair in a fro. You're going to straighten that. And then when you kind of push back, like, hey, why are you trying to touch my hair? Oh, I was sorry. I was just joking. You're taking it too serious. So we're a lot of times being gaslit, second guessing ourselves. We're falling victim to the narratives and saying, well, maybe I'm not qualified. Maybe they see something I don't see. And the fact of the matter is, most of us go into these spaces and say, hey, I'm probably the smartest person in the room. Everyone else seems mediocre. Why is that happening? Why are we all saying the same thing? It's not mass hysteria. So we have to, I think, share these stories, these narratives among Black women, that a lot of times we're more than qualified, more than worthy, we're more than educated, more than competent. A lot of it, I think, is intimidation. A lot of it, and I always tell people it's above me because I don't really know the psychology of it. All I know is we are in trauma and other people have their own trauma. And I always tell people, it's above me because that person, you can't change other people. All I do is whenever I go into a space, I strut into that space. I didn't get off the city bus with my bonnet and my house shoes. Somebody told me to come here. Somebody offered me a job, or somebody paid me to facilitate a training, or somebody said, hey, you have a bachelor's or master's degree, so you should be here. Right. So I operate in that way. I literally go into an environment and I command that environment just like I command my classroom. And if someone interrupts me or there's microaggressions, I don't even look at it. Black women, a lot of times, they say, I don't want to correct someone if they're doing something that makes me uncomfortable, because then it puts a target on my back. And I always say, well, it's almost like me as a teacher. If a student is creating chaos in your classroom, you don't say, I'm going to not stop the student from helping everybody else to learn because it puts a target on my back. You're the leader. So whenever you're in a space, own that space, walk into it. And it's not like toxic positivity. It's going and knowing that spaces a lot of times are toxic and you have to respond in kind. If someone's interrupting you, I'm going to say my point and I really want to hear what you have to say. When I'm done, I'd love to hear your question. And that to me is professional. That's what I would expect from my college students. And I think sometimes as Black women, we minimize those experiences because we don't want to call attention to bad behavior. And whatever the reason is for it, a lot of times if we correct it, we're showing that person that is something that is a boundary. And I think no, and making sure that we're saying no, whether it's, working overtime or taking a position where it's like, okay, that's not my job. All those things are valid. And I think we just have to just value ourselves, value our opinion to make sure we're heard. And that's a lot of why I said, I'm not yelling. We're not yelling. We're just asserting ourselves. We're being confident. We know that we're qualified and we're speaking our truth.
For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Esther Dillard on the Black Information Network, speaking with award-winning author Elizabeth Liba about her book, I'm Not Yelling, A Black Woman's Guide to Navigating the Workplace. One point in the book I thought, especially it's at the beginning, when you talk about that experience about being falsely accused, that really touched me, especially that happening as a college student. That was taking on a lot. Can you, I know that I want to ask this question, but you have to kind of give a framework and explain a little bit about what happened without giving away the whole book. But does that still affect you, how you navigate your world and the workplace? And what advice do you have for those who have similar experiences with criminal justice? Because this is a real situation for probably a lot of our listeners, and it's real talk for a lot of people.
Absolutely. As I was doing the research for the book, what I found is Black women, I started thinking about Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor and all the names, the hashtags, too many to name now. We have another young woman that was killed right in front of her son. And we know that Black women are more likely to be arrested, more likely to be a part of violence, whether it is in the home or outside the home. Black women are really typically most vulnerable. And my situation was that I had a false arrest, and racial profiling was a big part of that. So I wanted to really open up and unpack that feeling, the feeling that a lot of us have been accused of things. A lot of us have felt like we didn't belong. A lot of people have been told that they were not worthy to be in a space. And when you're arrested, I think it's probably the pinnacle of that. You're like, why is this happening to me? I ended up getting the charges dropped. I filed a civil lawsuit and I won that civil lawsuit. But just the trauma of a lot of us are going into spaces knowing that my skin color can make me a target. And we see this in the news. It's linked fate, where a lot of times we're looking at these things that happen, my situation and other situations, thinking, hey, that could be me. And I think for a lot of us, understanding that that's real and embracing the fact that us having trauma is not unusual. We've had that really since the beginning of our existence in this on this continent, in this world, really, ever since we came into contact with people that didn't have our best interests in mind. So I think it goes beyond us really going into an environment and being confident. It's just really understanding that our situation is not our fault. Our situation is not anything that is lacking in us. When we're targeted, that's real. And I think sometimes as Black women, we're taught just put your nose down and no one wants to see your tears. You don't have time to cry, because my parents told me that, people in the community, you got to toughen up. This is a tough world out here. And I think there's validity in that because it's true. But there also is the fact that most of us are suffering from a lot of mental health, emotional anxiety, stress. A lot of us are having, our hair is falling out. We got fibroids, we have lupus, we have all kinds of things that are happening. And this is not something that we could control because the environments are not conducive to us. So making sure that I think that the rest, or even some people losing their lives, that is like the far end of it. But it doesn't mean that you're going into the office and experiencing microaggressions. That's still very serious. And I think sometimes we brush it off. Oh, that's not a big deal. I'm going to just go back to work tomorrow and I'm going to forget about it. But the body keeps score. We know that. So the stress and anxiety that we're experiencing is something that we have to understand and have these conversations and really build community so that we can just really navigate situations with a clear, we don't want to gaslight ourselves. So we're not just going to go into a situation saying, this is my imagination. I think that's the biggest thing, making sure that we're not buying into a narrative that says we're not good enough, or if we do something more, this wouldn't happen, because it's just not true.
Well, I don't want to forget before I let you go is, what about your newest project, The Great Exhale? What is that about and how can listeners get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. The Great Exhale is an online platform community. We're building that in Mighty Networks. So we're starting there and hoping to scale into our own proprietary platform where we're asking Black women if they feel as though they need a safe space to talk about these issues, develop coping skills, healing, self-care, meditation, yoga, all the things that help us to really decompress and even just have these kinds of conversations, the kind of conversations that help us to understand we're not alone. That is why we're opening up this community for those that want to be a part of that.
And that's at thegreatexhale.com.
thegreatexhale.com.
All right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Liba, for your time, your conversation, your inspiration, and all the best to you in your endeavors.
Thank you so much, Esther. It was a pleasure.
It was. That's it for this edition of The Color Between the Lines. The book is I'm Not Yelling, A Black Woman's Guide to Navigating the Workplace. Until next time, I'm Esther Dillard on the Black Information Network.